Recently, I saw Transformers 1, which was heavily discussed online at the time of its release. It includes some videos made by fellow YouTubers I'm a fan of, such as Alistair Hakan, who you should check out for yourself if you haven't already. And I have my own thoughts on it. When I saw the trailers for this, I was actually drained to see it, as it looked no different from the standard soulless schlock we see from the MCU with its humor, along with other noble IPs that have unfortunately been infantilized or dumbed down because studios often take the intelligence and maturity of their intended audiences for granted. For the bulk of this video, I'm going to be doing a review and breakdown of the plot, but before I do, I want to answer the question I raised in the thumbnail on whether or not this is the best Transformers movie released so far. And my answer is yes, just hands down yes. It easily clears the Bayverse movies, is a bit better than Bumblebee, which I also saw recently after it was recommended to me, and this might be a bit of a controversial take if I have some hardcore Transformers fans, but I would even say it's better than the original Transformers movie if we put nostalgia aside. It didn't do very well at the box office at the time of its release. I have my own theories as to why it failed, which I'll discuss at the end of the video. But if you haven't seen it, then I highly encourage you do and come back to my breakdown later so it doesn't get spoiled for you. But if you care about personal ratings, then I would give this an 8 out of 10 and we'll just leave it at that to leave the movie as vague as possible for people in case they decide to go see it. One last thing before I start the review, but I should note that I am a filthy casual to the Transformers franchise. Most of my interactions with it are through either shows, movies, or games. I'm not super knowledgeable about the lore when it comes to things like the comics, so if I gloss over something fan service related or get some terminology wrong or anything else, then feel free to leave a comment correcting me or highlighting something I missed. Now on to the review. This movie takes place before the two biggest characters of the franchise, Optimus Prime, leader of the Autobots, and Megatron, leader of the Decepticons, become enemies, which predates the Cybertronian War and even the factions of Autobots and Decepticons. Instead, Cybertronians fought against the Quintessence, who outside of this movie are typically depicted as a multi-faced alien conqueror that leads more monstrous or animalistic non-Cybertronian robots to do their bidding. We don't directly see them in this movie though, as we are told that the war against them ended before the events of the film take place, because most of the Cybertronian primes, who in the Transformers universe are the greatest warriors Cybertron had to offer, all sacrificed themselves to end the war. The lone surviving prime, Sentinel Prime, rules the city of Iacon in what seems to be a time of peace and prosperity. The movie starts off in the city of Iacon, where we follow the bot that would eventually come to be known as Optimus Prime, Orion Pax. He breaks into a heavily guarded library to try and find hints of where an ancient artifact known as the Matrix of Leadership may be located, and to solve the growing energon shortage, which is what the Cybertronians rely on to keep themselves alive. While soaring through some of the historical archives, Orion watches a type of historical documentary that delivers a lore dump to the audience. Besides a history lesson, Orion is unable to find any answers. A security drone finds Orion and alerts two guards. Orion is of course in trouble for breaking and entering, and we get a funny interaction where he pleads to have a normal chase with the guards since it'll be fun, and that even though he's without a transformation cog, he can still transform. He then proceeds to transform his body by putting his legs together and pretending to transform when the camera jump cuts to him quickly running away. A chase ensues, with Orion parkouring throughout Cybertron and across trains. He eventually falls onto the lower level where all the other miners are when suddenly the two Garbots come looking for him. This is where D16, Megatron, is introduced and bumps into them on purpose to give Orion an opportunity to run off and hide. D16 catches up with Orion and the two discuss what happened while riding a subway train. Orion surprises D16 with a sticker of Megatronus Prime's face design, which is the Decepticon insignia. Here it is established that D16 is a huge Megatronus fan, sort of to the extent someone would treat a religious figure. This moment establishes their unexpected brotherly relationship, with Orion thanking D16 for saving him and having his back. Keep this in mind because this is extremely important for later. It is also established here that Sentinel Prime undergoes expeditions to the surface to look for the Matrix of Leadership so they can restore power to Cybertron, but has so far been unsuccessful. Orion, who is looked down on for being cogless, wants to find the Matrix of Leadership to prove himself. The two then go to report to duty with their captain Alita 1, who is about to go on another mining expedition. They fall in line with the other bots, where we see a couple cameo appearances of Sideswipe, Wheeljack, and Jazz, who go flying in on jetpacks and begin mining. As they mine for Energon, something goes wrong and the mines begin to collapse. All of the miners flee, except for Jazz, who gets stuck under a boulder. Alita orders everyone to leave him, but Orion defies her orders and insists on helping him. Another funny moment happens where Jazz acts super melodramatic and says that they would be better off leaving him, but Orion says something to the degree of, "You're right." Then Jazz is just like, wait, are you for real? But Orion comes back with some sort of pike device that he and D16 are able to use to lift the boulder off of Jazz and pull him out. Jazz's leg is ripped off, but Orion carries Jazz on his shoulders while he and D16 run for their lives outside of the mine. They all barely make it out, but there's some sort of energon surge that backfires throughout the mines and pushes everyone back. Alita is freaking out because everything went terribly and she's afraid that she's going to suffer massive consequences because of it. Orion tries to reassure her by saying, well, it's not like you're going to get fired or anything, right? Only for their higher up Darkwing to land right behind her and say, "You're fired."
My finger can transform. Guess which one?
Alita gets pissed off at Orion and holds a grudge against him as she storms off. D16 and Orion report back to their bunkers when Sentinel pops up on their news feed and claims that he has returned from yet another dangerous voyage to the surface, but was unable to retrieve the Matrix. This causes all of the miners to become upset, as this means they must keep on slaving away in the mines. However, Sentinel tells everyone not to worry about it as he announces the Iacon 5000 race. He says that the boss can take some time off while they enjoy the race, as it is taking place on the anniversary of the Matrix being lost. On their way to the race, Orion gets D16 to follow him to a secret spot. Upon reaching the spot, D16 is amazed that they have such a fantastic view to watch the start of the race. But then, Orion puts a jetpack onto D's back and says, it's time to show them where more than meets the eye. The race begins and the two are dropped into the lanes below where they take off and do surprisingly well as they outmaneuver more experienced racers and vehicle forms throughout the race. Sentinel spots them and questions how the hell two colorless miners even got in there, while all the other miners see the two and begin cheering like crazy as they see themselves represented in such a way that they aren't used to. The two eventually end up near the finish line after landing on Darkwing and making him look bad, but get knocked down and end up in dead last. D16 is furious that he let Orion talk him into participating and is now worried that they will be severely punished. But to their surprise, Sentinel and his top lieutenant Arachnid walk into the room. Sentinel bends down and congratulates the two on the race, saying it was the coolest thing he's seen in a while. D16 asks if they're in trouble, and Sentinel just starts laughing. Sentinel then claims that the two will be treated to special activities and leaves the room with Arachnid. Unfortunately for them, Darkwing happens to be the one that's supposed to escort them out. Darkwing is super pissed off to the degree that he's just grunting, "Miners, miners, miners," over and over again, so he puts them in the depths of the mining life, the smelting area. This is where they meet Bumblebee, who is also working there. I would like to take this as an opportunity to give my thoughts on Bumblebee, because really, your thoughts on him are probably going to remain the same all throughout the moment he's introduced. In a lot of his modern appearances, he's typically mute and speaks via radio or through beeps, taking advantage of both the robot and car motifs. It's not always a requirement though, as he also just talks normally in other appearances, but what makes this version of Bumblebee annoying is that he just talks way too much and a lot of the time it's not really anything of substance. While everyone else in the main cast has an arc, he pretty much exists solely as comic relief for little kids who think Teen Titans Go is a gold standard for comedy. But the issue isn't inherently comedic relief, it's the tone of it. We've had a bunch of natural jokes that flow pretty well with the story from the other characters, but with Bumblebee for the most part, his jokes aren't really relevant and allows the story to drag at certain points. It's what separates R2-D2 and C-3PO in the original Star Wars trilogy versus Jar Jar Binks in the prequel movies. They're funny, but bring something to the table besides being goofy characters you point and laugh at. R2 represents a call to adventure for Luke Skywalker, while C-3PO is a worrywart who reminds the audience of the stakes and danger of a given situation. Bumblebee's whole shtick in this movie, though, is just being loud and obnoxious, and I wish we could have gotten something further developed than that. Back to where we left off. B is introducing himself and is just blabbering on and on, with the film implying that he has gone a little insane since he has spent ages down there alone. This makes D16 even more upset because he believes they are stuck there forever. So Orion asks B when they will be able to leave, and he enthusiastically just says, "Never." B then introduces him to his friends, which are really just piles of junk made to look like robots. While fooling around with one called Steve, an SOS message chip thingamabob falls out and plays a recording of Alpha Trion, along with coordinates to where the attack took place. Orion insists this must be where the Matrix is. D16 is initially against it, but then Orion says this could be his chance to redeem himself and see Megatronus in person, so he decides to join him. They then ask B if there's any possible way out, to which he points upwards towards the trash chute. So the trio all climb through the trash and scrap metal up into the upper levels. Once they reach the upper levels, they notice that they can hitch a ride on a train to the surface, since the trains are already carrying their energon source up there anyway. They come across Alita, who is now being forced to work a more grueling job, and try their best to hide from her. They still end up getting found, and Alita, still holding a grudge against Orion, tries to stop the train to report them, which leads to a chase. After a short struggle, they eventually end up on top of the train where Orion explains to Alita that he has a legitimate map to where the Matrix may be, so she decides to take over the expedition and lead them to the location so she can get a promotion. Shortly after, the ground spikes up at the back of the train, sending everyone into the air and crashing down to the ground. Now, with no way back to Iacon, everyone is further motivated to following the coordinates. They eventually come across an abandoned post and notice Cybertronian deer acting strange. This is when a quintessence ship suddenly emerges from the clouds, leaving everyone shocked and confused because they were all under the impression that the quintessence had all vanished. They narrowly avoid the ship and eventually make it to the cave. While exploring the cave, they all come across the corpses of various primes. D16 finds the corpse of Megatronus and finds that he, along with the other primes, were killed in very strange ways. Orion discovers the body of Alpha Trion, the prime that sent the distress signal, and finds that he's in stasis. The group feeds Alpha Trion a piece of Energon, which brings him back to life. Alpha Trion explains to the group how everything they've been told all throughout their life on the current state of Cybertron is a lie. All of the primes that lay dead before them were killed because of a setup by Sentinel, who is a false prime. Sentinel was initially just a lackey who grew jealous of the special treatment that primes received from Primus, so he arranged a meeting with the Quintessence. He then set up an ambush on the primes so that he may have the Matrix for himself, and so the Quintessence can stop attacking Cybertron in exchange for Energon. However, Sentinel was unaware one does not simply obtain the Matrix, they had to be deemed worthy to wield it. Because Sentinel was morally bankrupt, the Matrix completely disappears. This of course doesn't bother the Quintessence, who still expect their Energon, so Sentinel forced an entire generation of Cybertronians to unknowingly be born solely for the existence of mining. He stripped them of their transformation cogs to limit their agency. They even see a deal between Sentinel and the Quintessence happen right before their very eyes while hidden. This revelation demoralizes everybody, but it especially demoralizes D16, who says that he wants to publicly execute Sentinel for his crimes. Orion doesn't agree and wants to publicly try him for his crimes, but their disagreement is put aside for now. While Alpha Trion is taken aback at how Sentinel mutilated them all, he tells them not to lose hope and teaches them that the power of a Transformer not lies within their cog, but with what's within their spark. Alpha Trion then gives them cogs from the deceased primes, which makes them stronger, but Arachnid has caught up to them and sends minions into the area. D16 wants to stay and fight, but Alpha Trion insists that they run and that he'll hold them off. He also gives Orion a recording of all the events that went down, so that he may show the people the truth of Sentinel and the truth of their civilization. And while this is all an interesting turn in developments, I do have one question worth asking, which is how exactly did Sentinel gaslight an entire population into forgetting that they are born with cogs? Considering we don't exactly know how long in human years the war took place, I'm willing to speculate that Sentinel spent a long time rewriting history and bringing key people over to his cause to keep the lie going. But the movie doesn't even try to give us a reason or explanation of how Sentinel managed to make everyone who were still around during the time of the war magically stupid. If a Cybertronian lived as long as Sentinel has and is capable of transforming, then did they all just fall in line and repeat the lie? This is one of the few major issues I have with the movie, but it's a major one that brings the story's world building into question and why I can't find myself giving it a higher rating. Coming back to where we left off, Orion and the others all try to learn on the spot how to transform while fleeing, but eventually manage to do so right when Sentinel's guards land directly in front of their path. They spend some time fighting them off, which is pretty badass. However, there's one surviving guard who is about to shoot Orion when D16 shoots him with his new cannon on his tank form and then drives up, transforming and stomping on the now deceased guard. D16 laughs maniacally as he now exclaims they have the power to overthrow Sentinel and get revenge for what he's done to their lives and the planet. He then snatches the recording from Orion's grasp and leads the group. Orion tries to take it back, but D16 says, "I said I got it." It's at this point that the relationship between Orion and D16 becomes noticeably tense. As they start walking back to Iacon, the group starts discussing again what they'll do when they get back, and Orion mentions getting justice and letting the people find out the truth, while D16 is still dedicated to killing Sentinel and making him suffer. However, they all end up being knocked unconscious and put in temporary stasis by some bandits. As this is happening, Alpha Trion is brought before Sentinel, who executes him and vows to eliminate any other loose ends, ordering Arachnid to go back and hunt down the others. The group wake up as prisoners in Starscream's lair, who alongside Soundwave and Shockwave lead a rebel group of former High Guardsmen that have been stealing from Sentinel after his betrayal. Starscream explains to the group how he and the others witnessed what Sentinel has done as well and are trying to fight back and make himself the leader, which causes D16 to attempt leaving because he's tired of hearing about false leaders. Starscream takes this as a challenge and walks up to D16, telling him that no one leaves unless he says so. The two then proceed to fight in front of everyone. D16 gets the upper hand by getting on top of Starscream and punching him in the face repeatedly, with Starscream egging him on. As this is happening, D16 notices Starscream's followers cheering and takes this as an opportunity to impress them and become their leader. He then begins choking Starscream, messing up his voice box, which causes his voice to sound like his classic G1 Starscream counterpart from the show.
I'm stupid! I'm stupid!
Starscream is still acting tough and pushing D16, which causes him to get mad and transform his arm into his classic fusion cannon, also from the original cartoon, for the first time. D16 spares Starscream, but begins rallying the High Guard and calling for them to storm Iacon and kill Sentinel and take over Cybertron for themselves. Orion is shocked and just looks on at D16 with a horrified and disappointed expression. D16 just looks back at Orion with an enraged stare, communicating that he is no longer the friend he once knew. Suddenly, Arachnid and the rest of Sentinel's troops show up, storming Starscream's base. A battle begins, with the Royal Guard and the main group directly fighting back against Sentinel's army. We get another cool fight sequence where we have Orion and the others shooting at incoming Royal Guards, while Arachnid slices and dices her way through Starscream's men, beheading them and cutting them up effortlessly. Eventually, Orion gets knocked out from some boulders that fell on him, only to wake up later with D16, Bumblebee, Starscream, and some of the other members of the High Guard captured and taken directly to Sentinel. There are still some High Guard members left, including Shockwave and Soundwave. Alita helps Orion up and talks to him one-on-one. She acts standoffish by telling him that she's better than him in every single way, except that she lacks his optimism. She says that Orion is special because he has hope for his people and the planet, and that if anyone can rally others to fight back, it'd be him, and that he should lead the charge onto Iacon to free the prisoners and reveal the truth to their people. I think now is the perfect time for me to go into my thoughts on Alita as a character. Despite what I will expect to hear some people say about Alita in this movie, she's not a Mary Sue or an insufferable girl boss character, as she doesn't steal the limelight from Orion and even acknowledges why he is the one calling the shots and not her. Her focus on getting a promotion throughout the movie blinds her from realizing what's important to do in the moment, which is something Orion doesn't struggle with, as he does the right thing solely on instinct. Her arc in this movie is incredibly consistent with her previous characterizations in the past, as she has always been portrayed as a competent soldier who leaves a sassy comment from time to time. After hearing encouragement from Alita, Orion gets up and tells the rest of the High Guard the plan. He then says to transform and roll out. As they're making their way back to Iacon, Sentinel confronts the prisoners and exclaims how they are all going to become examples for everyone else of what happens when you oppose him. D16 refuses to grovel at Sentinel's feet, and as a result, Sentinel tortures him. He also reveals that he had stolen the cog belonging to Megatronus for himself and savagely scars the insignia onto D16's chest, establishing the basis for the Decepticon logo. At the same time, Orion, Alita, and the rest of Starscream's forces go back to Iacon to tell the miners about the true nature of Sentinel and how he's really running things, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. While the miners want to stop Sentinel, they're hesitant because they don't know how much help they'll be without their cogs, but Orion tells them that what makes a transformer isn't their cog, but their spark, or heart, which gives them the ability to make decisions to make changes for the better. After his speech, the miners are fully on board with Orion now and join him to stop Sentinel and free D16 and the others. While storming Sentinel's fortress, they get intercepted by Arachnid and the rest of Sentinel's forces, where Orion realizes that he can project all of her recorded memories of Sentinel's actions across the city to expose him. This leads to a final battle with Sentinel where everyone teams up to finally defeat him. But even though Sentinel has been exposed as a fraud and beaten, Orion and D16 argue once again on what to do with him, with Orion wanting to have him be given a proper trial, while D16 just wants to outright execute him. Finally reaching his breaking point, D16 snaps and just outright fights Orion for being in his way. D16 gets the upper hand and has a heavily damaged Orion hanging on a ledge with one arm. Orion calls out to D16, who allows him to fall into the dark depths of Iacon. D16 then rips Sentinel in half in front of everyone, declaring that the Age of Primes is over and that he will lead them going forward as Megatron, and tells his followers to burn the city of Iacon to the ground as revenge. There's a reason I've saved my thoughts for Orion and D16 until the climax, and that's because there's a lot to talk about. In order to understand how D16 got to this point, we have to acknowledge that since the very beginning, D16's faith in the system was much, much stronger than Orion's, and as such, he was much more psychologically damaged when they discovered the betrayal. Plus, all throughout the story is just one hit after another for him. There's the betrayal of Sentinel, then the deal with the Quintessence, then the truth about their cogs being removed so they can be slaves. By the end of it, you can believe that a true believer in the system betrayed by it would be out for blood. Orion is just as hurt, but he believes that simply telling Iacon about the truth will be enough. He believes that there is still good within the culture of Iacon despite being misled by Sentinel, and while that's a nice sentiment, it's clear that he has no real plan beyond spread the truth and hope for the best. This is not appealing to D16, as he isn't just disgusted with Sentinel, he's sickened by the entire system that allowed someone like him to take power in the first place. Everything ranging from the lackeys that follow him, the propaganda that spreads his lies, the entire city that made his entire life a lie. He wants to murder Sentinel, as well as burn down everything Sentinel ever touched and everything that stands in the way of his retribution. When D16 gets his cog, he for the first time in his life gets the feeling of control he has over his own destiny and thinks that anything he sets his mind to is possible. He outright says that he never wants to put his trust in anything but his own strength ever again. This attitude is what wins him command over Starscream's band of rebels. When Orion goes from naive optimist who gets D16 into trouble to actually stopping him from killing Sentinel is where he's finally had enough. Orion was fully with D16 on overthrowing the regime, but it was killing a defenseless Sentinel without proving his guilt to the public that he took issue with. He knew that simply taking out Sentinel and ruling in his stead wasn't an optimal solution and would lead to the collapse of Iacon and Cybertron in general, as it would simply lead to various factions fighting each other to rule through strength alone. There was no reason they couldn't put him on trial for his crimes and imprison him. Then, D16's transformation into Megatron further misses the point by just saying to tear everything down and make an enemy out of everyone, as if that will solve anything. D16 allows Orion to fall because he convinced himself that saving his friend again and again was only holding him back not just from his personal betterment, but for the betterment of everyone on Cybertron. Also, something I really enjoyed about D16 renaming himself after Megatronus is that it comes along with the subtle detail of getting rid of the last two letters because after his falling out with Orion, there's no longer an us. Just a nice little detail I thought was cool. As Megatron and his followers proceed to lay waste to Iacon, Orion continues his descent. However, the spirits of Alpha Trion and the other primes witness Orion's acts of bravery and entrusted him with the Matrix of Leadership, which allows him to be reborn as Optimus Prime. Optimus returns to fight Megatron and his followers in a rematch and defeats them all. In the aftermath, Optimus spares Megatron and the other members of the High Guard, but exiles them from Iacon, leaving him, Alita, Bumblebee, and the rest of the miners now with transformation cogs to rebuild Iacon and deal with the Quintessence. At the same time, Megatron has made all the members of the High Guard swear fealty to him by taking on the Megatronus insignia and labeling themselves as the Decepticons, officially setting the stage of the main conflict in the franchise everyone is familiar with. And that's the movie, and I gotta say, I found it to be a lot of fun, but a lot of people didn't seem to think that it would be. Before we explore why, I want to share some other thoughts I had about the movie. Firstly, the lore building of the two main factions is great. Some people might take issue with the Decepticons still calling themselves an outwardly sinister group like the Decepticons when they see themselves as being in the right, but I would say it still works because they call themselves that as a reminder that they were lied to. Rather than being the deceivers, they were the deceived. That being said, I wish the other main Decepticons were developed a bit more. The same applies to some of the other Autobots, but I understand that they can only dedicate a select amount of screen time to certain characters. And this is entirely personal preference, but I also wanted Sentinel to have a bit more character depth. I understand that he has to be an egotistical psychopath, but something I would have preferred is if Sentinel was made a bit more sympathetic in his motivations. Still make him a piece of shit, of course, but also provide him with a bit of justification for why he did what he did so that it has some added nuance to it. Having him say that he made a deal with the Quintessence merely for self-gain to rule Cybertron while serving under them by itself is a little shallow for me. But if they put more nuance in his decision by having him argue that he technically still stopped the war by surrendering because he couldn't stand seeing any more Cybertronians die to the Quintessence, and that the Primes were leading their race to extinction by knowingly continuing a war they knew they couldn't win, that could have made for an interesting dilemma. To Sentinel, sacrificing the other Primes and the autonomy of some of the other Cybertronians to appease the Quintessence was, from his perspective, necessary for the preservation of Cybertron. This unexpected twist causes a rift between Orion and D16, who were already butting heads with what to do with Sentinel before. Naturally, you would have both of them correctly point out that it doesn't excuse Sentinel's continued crimes and selling out his people, though. At some point, Sentinel grew to accept his role as a servant to the contestants and gave up finding ways to beat them to be given a life of leisure. You could even say that he's simply still lying and didn't actually save anyone, just killed his friends and sacrificed the freedom of all of his fellow Cybertronians for selfish reasons. But not having a straight answer since everyone who knows the actual truth is dead still adds room for doubt. D16 would have to deal with the possibility that the heroes he looked up to failed him just like Sentinel, which would be his breaking point into becoming Megatron. I think this would have been a better way of D16 becoming Megatron, but as it is, well, we got it still perfectly fine and I'm happy with it.
The dynamic between Optimus Prime and Megatron in this movie was phenomenal. While Orion Pax is an idealist who optimistically believes that one can naturally rise above their circumstances to transform into something greater, D16 is someone with a complete opposite worldview all throughout the film from beginning to end.
From the get-go, we see him making up excuses for how he and Orion are treated by those with cogs by arguing that they're inferior for not having them. And the reason Megatronus is his favorite Prime has to do with him being seen as the strongest. You more or less already had the seeds there of D16 already glorifying strength to the point where he would argue in favor of his abusers just because he was the small minor and they were not. He is given a false image of Cybertronian society by Sentinel, and when that illusion is broken for him, he rationalizes pure strength as being the natural state of all societies. The only leader you can trust is yourself, therefore, through whatever means you gain leadership, it's justifiable to achieve the end result. His philosophy is might makes right, and to have peace through tyranny. While his former friends transformed into being something greater than they were originally, D16's change into Megatron amounts to a simple appearance change as he never really transformed out of the mindset he had all throughout the film. It's a great contrast between him and Orion maturing into a leader and the ideologies of the Autobots and the Decepticons. As someone that was expecting very little from this, I was pleasantly surprised by how competently written it was. I said this in the beginning, but so many movies, especially if they are adaptations of previous works and or are trying to generate a franchise in sequels, just completely bungle what should otherwise be really straightforward stories with clear, concise narratives and expect us all to go along with it when all it does is create these shaky foundations for future sequels. But here we have a very clear, very competently put together interpretation of a franchise that makes creative changes to suit the type of story the Transformers franchise is intended for, and at the same time, has a lore and setting make sense for the most part and contribute to the narrative in a way that's easy to understand and accept. I can see how a sequel to this film could go in so many different directions and not at all feel contrived or confusing, but because of the returns, it doesn't look as though we'll be given a continuation of what's to come. But the problems with the movie don't just lie with bad outlets like IGN giving bad reviews unfortunately, but because the studio really shot themselves in the foot when releasing this to theaters at the time that they did. Despite marketing it primarily for kids, it was released late into September when they were all back in school and leaning into the Halloween season. Because it was marketed towards a very young demographic, it ruined the first impressions to every other demographic by making a trailer depicting it as an obnoxious Marvel quip fest, which encouraged people not to see it. However, what's impressive is that after people gave the film a chance, they invested a lot of time spreading awareness of how good the movie actually was, and were practically doing promotions for it better online than any of the people putting out the advertisements. Tell me, which ad honestly makes you want to see this movie more? This fan-made TikTok made by a passionate fan that cost pretty much no money?
How are we supposed to do that?
We can't fight. We don't have cogs.
What defines a Transformer is not the cog in its chest, but the spark that resides in their core. A spark that gives you the will to make your world better. And that spark essentially can never take from us.
Orion Pax, your noble sacrifice for the greater good has proven you worthy in the eyes of Primus. He entrusts in you the future of Cybertron and the matrix of leadership. Arise, Optimus Prime.
And now we stand here together as one, proving we all have the power to transform, to become who we were destined to be, to right wrongs, to make our world better.
Or this unfunny, professionally made TikTok that fails to give you an accurate picture of the type of movie it's advertising.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for the Energon, Beef Fan 156. Guys, if you gift me one more Matrix of Leadership, I'll do a backflip. You can talk now. I've always been able to talk. What are you talking about? Can you invite Optimus Prime to the next live? Oh, that's a good one. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask. I Love Decepticons asks, did you hear Megatron's new diss track? Oh, no, I have not. But you know what? He's washed anyways, so I'm not gonna listen. Do you really have knife hands? Oh, no, you know it. And they're sharp, too. I've got to be real careful when I'm playing with my action figure. When is the new Transformers movie coming out? Oh, come on, guys. You know this? It's in theaters September 20th. Honestly, you mean there's still people out there who don't have their tickets yet? You got to be kidding. Go. Buy your tickets. Go. Go get them now.
Overall, what did they get right with this movie? Well, the major thing to note is that despite being a reboot, the filmmakers didn't abandon the aspects a lot of fans enjoyed for a mythical, modern audience that we hear so much about, and instead expanded on the aspects that everyone enjoyed so that there's something for the longtime fans.
In that sense, it is absolutely better than the original movie.
The biggest praise I can give the original is that it was a big spectacle, and that's about it. Some fans liked how the movie had the cojones to kill off several Transformers, particularly the Autobots, but I'm not one of them because the reason they did so was to simply push and sell new characters. With the exception of Optimus Prime and Starscream, whose deaths I thought were well done, all these other characters you got invested in from the cartoon either die unceremoniously or just off screen. I understand how people can find this to be cool, but from a storytelling perspective, I just find it disappointing. After the movie, I frankly didn't have the same level of attachment towards the new cast compared to the old cast, so I just found it to be a waste how they just didn't give them all upgraded designs instead. That isn't to say that I'm against killing off some of these characters, but that their send-offs could be better executed. When the original movie went into production, the whole Transformers franchise was only about 2 years old. And not just that, but action figures and the idea that these robots had an enduring character that kids actually got attached to was totally new. Hasbro's earlier action figures had very little in terms of personality and no canon story, which left it up to the kids buying them to make stuff up about them a lot of the time. Whether they intended to or not, Transformers had become fully fleshed out stories in their own right, and I don't think they were quite ready to accept the full implications of that. With Transformers 1, we finally have a Transformers movie that gives us a fresh story where these characters are properly fleshed out and given concise character arcs that can appeal to both older and newer fans. And going forward, I hope that this is the standard people have when approaching long-running franchises and reboots, because trying to shut off the longtime fans and radically alter the franchise as if they are something to be ashamed of is a recipe for disaster. If you simply stick to the roots of what makes a franchise special and explore it in new and exciting ways, then you will see much more positive reception compared to what you'll get otherwise. And that's everything I have for you guys today. If you liked the video, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing. Thanks and have a good one.